Hello, hello, and welcome back to Shatter Our Souls with Novaria. We're starting this off back in the Agon Wastes, shortly after defeating the first area boss, uh, known as Amorbus. Now, funnily enough, after collecting the Light of Aether, there is a barrier of sorts that prevents you from going from one area to the next. I assume it's a little bit of a gamey idea, but I like the mentality behind it because it actually um, it makes sure that the player of Metroid Prime 2 takes the time to actually finish the section of the story they're in. Because Agon Wastes, for all intents and purposes, up until basically end game, doesn't really have much of a purpose anymore. It's done. We have finished the section of the gigantic war that we've been dealing with in this area, and now Agon is free. Free from the threat of the Ing and their constant attempts at growing into the light world. There's nothing left for the Ing here. Their focuses are elsewhere, which I suppose is what we gotta get focused on. The world of Metroid Prime 2 is separated into three distinct sections. Well, four. Eight if we count the Dark Wall. Those being the Central Fortress, which is where the sage Umos, or Umos, the sole survivor of the Luminoth that is also not in stasis, resides. The second being Agon Wastes. Third, Torvus Bog, and fourth, the Sanctuary Fortress. Now, Agon Wastes, for all that it seems to be here, is not what it used to be. Agon Wastes in the lore is described as a verdant paradise, a plains filled with life that has, over the course of of probably 50 years, changed from an agricultural hub to now a more, well, to a barren wasteland. Agon, for all intents and purposes, is lacks the initial purpose that it had. But good can still come from this day. With the light of Aether once more restored to Agon Wastes, the skies will be clear for the first time in close to a generation. The lightning storm will cease, and the world will begin to renew itself once more. Agon Wastes is now freed. With the temple's energy restored, the light side of Aether is currently sitting at about 3/8 of its total power. Now, that might not seem like much. It's less than half of the power that it would ordinarily have. But the major problem with this actually boils down to the fact that the light of aether has been missing for a long time. The Ing have been in possession of effectively 7 out of 8 portions. The main temple above or in the central tower, the central fortress, housing only 1/8 of the total power of the light of aether, was housing all that remained of the light of aether in its entirety. It is a considerable difference between what was and what should have been. Anywho, that's my 2 cents on it for this portion of time. Anywho, we're not too focused on that. We should be focused in on our next major location. Now, today we are going to also be going into the Torvus Bog. Now, unlike the wasteland that the central temple, as well as the Agon Wastes have been, Torvus Bog is, how do I put it? It's a different type of paradise, shall we say. Torvus Bog focuses in primarily on an area that was once a rainforest. But since the loss of the light of aether in the Torvus area has become a bog, a swamp, full of death and decay. As such, the Torvus Bog, while being one of the areas that houses, shall we say, it houses the most diversity of life of the areas that we visit throughout the game. And I believe that isn't a purposeful decision on behalf of the individuals making the game. The last major area, the Sanctuary Fortress, is a hub of technology. And I kind of like that each area has very distinct themes. I do wish that Metroid Prime had better theming at times, but I also kind of wish that Prime 2 didn't focus in on desert or rocky areas for as long as it did. Now, I have to be a little bit more specific about this. The central area around the Great Temple is a desert or rocky terrain. And there is nothing wrong with it. We're talking about cliffs overlooking the world at large. And that is amazing. The issue with it comes from the going from an area of muted tone to an area of muted tone. There's very little vibrancy in the two areas at the beginning of the game. Something that Metroid Prime 2 loses me on in the initial portions of the game. However, the initial portion of the game is officially done. We go into a new area full of lush forests, full of life, if not surrounded by decay. And I, in one way or another, wish that it could have had some of the same vibrancy that Prime 1 had in its opening. But by this portion in time in Prime 1, I was already in the where was it? Phendrana Drifts. Effectively, I was much farther into the game by this point in time than I am at this moment. So, welcome back to the Great Temple. Now, I think something that doesn't quite get mentioned enough, at least in my opinion, ties back to the Great Temple itself. This room we're standing in, every one of those red pods on the outsides are effectively stasis chambers. Every time we revisit this location, it's a grim reminder of what's at stake. That Samus, in this moment in time, is responsible for the lives of an entire species. Now, I'll admit this isn't the first time that's happened. But it's one of the first times that she's not the threat. There is one thing I do wish about the suit itself in this point in time. I love the silver accents of the dark suit, but I've never been the biggest fan of the brown. And while the sharp angles and harsh match between the Luminoth and Chozo technology was intended and has definitely grown on me over time, I, I kind of wish that that there would have been something a little bit different or a little bit more. Be that as it may, off to Torvus. Now, when I specified that this is not the first time that a entire species was in the brink because of Samus, or that Samus has been involved with, the most common is the Metroids. And I'm on the fence about them. I believe that Samus was doing what needed to be done in Metroid 2. Context: in Metroid 2, Samus was sent specifically to defeat all of the Metroids that were on their homeworld of SR 388. And that's perfectly fine. That was her mission. Samus is a bounty hunter. That is what she does. The issue that I have with it is that I believe that it is somewhat against Samus's moral compass to do so. And while at the time in the Metroid franchise, we only understood the Metroids as a weapon, as a species that was considered violent or devastating to the ecosystems and the lives around them, we didn't know the full scope of the story. And at that point in time, neither did Samus. In Prime 2, Samus is ironically on the same and opposite side of that situation that came up in Metroid 2. Samus is the last guardian, the last protector of peace on the planet of Aether, and is actively fighting a battle that the Luminoth themselves have lost. Simultaneously, she is dealing with a threat to the very galaxy itself in the form of the Ing. And both sides of this are accurate. She is both the protector and the devastator. She is everything in this particular circumstance. Her decisions, her actions greatly change how the world itself functions. And while there is a part of me that questions whether or not the Aang would be able to survive under a slightly different circumstance, for example, traveling to different planets, if aether ended up lost, there's really nothing stopping them from patrolling the cosmos, looking for a new realm to take over. In this way, they are much the same as the species that Trace came from. In Metroid Prime Hunters, there were 6 other hunters, but one that always stuck out to me was a bug-like creature named Trace. And Trace is a bounty hunter-ish. It is hunting or looking for new land, new worlds for its colony, its species to conquer. And the reason behind it is partially due to the overpopulation of its homeworld. I think that's fairly similar to what's going on with the Aang here. But the Aang, unlike Trace, are simply power hungry. They are very similar in effect to what the space pirates were in Prime 1, seeking out ways of gaining strength or winning their war without fully going through and figuring out what is the best course of action. Maybe I'm looking a little too far into it. Maybe I'm not. It's just kind of how I perceive the Prime 2 in general. This is... I've always found Prime 2 to be very much a game about duality. You have the light, the dark, the Aang, the Luminoth. You have Samus acting as both Devastator and Protector. And every single one of these statements is true and affect the outcome of this circumstance of the game itself. Now, one of the things that in my recent research of what's going on with Metroid and Metroid Prime came in the form of discovering a genre of media. Originally, it was brought about due to books like Bram Stoker's Dracula. The point of the information that was given was that it was always given as second-hand information. It was never given directly to an individual. You, the reader or the viewer or whatnot, could be given wildly different information. But the information that we were presented with was true from the perspective of the presenter. So, for example, while we lack lore specific to the Aang, we don't lack lore specific to the Space Pirates or the Chozo or the Luminoth. And so, if you dig into what each portion of the cast or the creatures involved with making this story, with telling their side of the tale, they tell how they perceive it. This is called an epistolary. And what makes the epistolary so unique is that you can be given information that is directly contrary to what is to one another and have both stories be true. An example being looking at the Luminoth and the Space Pirate lore in Prime 1. One viewed the Phazon as the Great Poison. The other viewed it as a great liberator. Both sides were technically true in their beliefs, but it was how they interpreted and used the substance, or refused to, saw what happened around it, that led to their decisions on whether or not it was a liberator, a power source, or it or was seen as a illness, a fear, something to be avoided. Now, that's all well and good. I would like to have had lore surrounding the Ing's perspective, but it's kind of a hard thing to actually get into. The Ing unfortunately lack much of the ability to communicate, at least the way that you or I would. And I believe due to how new the Ing are as a species, they simply lack the capability, which is a shame. There is much to be gained from multiple perspectives. I believe that the Ing had a lot going for them. And if they were not born into a circumstance that they were born into, I believe that their world, their worldview in general, would be very different from what it became. If they had the time to evolve as a species. Because the Ing, ironically, were born into a world that was full of technology. And their world, the world that they have, or that the Ing were native to, was decaying, falling apart. And they could see, in many ways, glimpses into what their world could be, in the form of the rifts that between light and dark aether. This is something that I don't think is very commonly seen or mentioned in the franchise. Light and dark aether were always in contrast with one another, even when they weren't in combat with one another. Rifts broke out between the pair of them. And while technology did advance to a point where they would be able to say, oh yeah, I can travel through here to get to my target or get to the other side. I can force a rift open. There was, in many cases, a lack of ability for them to travel from one end to the other. When the technology became true, or came to fruition, the Luminoth saw the Dark World, and saw just how devastating that world was. I believe that they saw the Dark World as a blight, an illness, that the world itself was sick or dying, or simply dangerous, but also understanding that it held half of the power of the light of Aether. Half of their planetary energy was gone. In an effort to bring back the golden age of their species, they created technology that allowed them to travel back and forth. Now, this wasn't without loss, without cost. This also wasn't without just cause. The Luminoth were being hunted by the Ing, as the Ing slowly took over other species in the light world, used their demonic power, their strength, and made themselves the apex predators of Aether. This began the war. The Luminoth thought that by simply taking the energy of Dark Aether, realigning their world with what it once was, that they would be able to bring back their golden age. And when it was proven to be ineffective, well, when it was proven that they lost, it was almost, well, it was devastating. See, after the loss of the energy transfer unit, which, mind you, they only had one of them, the Ing gained power and were quickly able to take the energy of the Sanctuary Fortress, Torvus, and from Agon Wastes. After all of the other locations had been taken, there was really nothing left for the Ing to go after, except the Great Temple. Ironically, the Luminoth, through a means of trying to end a war with minimal casualties, handed a tool to their greatest nightmare. And I think that's pretty common in media, honestly. It seems that more often than not, when it comes to finding a way around a situation, the path of avoidance ends up being the one that is most likely to succeed, but is also the one that often fails the hardest. Anywho, that's my 2 cents on it. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Now, I have to admit, I overextended myself today. And I will end up dying by the end of this video. Spoiler alert. Part of it is due to Metroid Prime 2's difficulty being significantly higher than Prime 1. I went through Prime, and I made it all the way to... Oh, geez. I think it was on my way through the mines when I fell the first time, which would be about 6-ish hours in. We're sitting about halfway there to where that would have been. And I'm not looking to be in good shape. So, yeah. Metroid Prime 2 is a heck of a lot harder than I had expected. Going forward, I'm going to be as cautious as possible. But I will be honest. From here on out, it just gets harder. And there are going to be many deaths in this run. I knew this from the beginning, from the get-go, that it was going to be one of the hardest challenges I've done on this channel altogether. I hope that you can bear with me. Each time I fall in combat, depending on how far into the video I am, I will either start up brand new, or start anew, and continue from the room before I fell, or the video will end right when it happens. In that way, the next time I start, I will effectively pick up where I left off in the situation that I was in prior. This way, you don't have to sit through the same section of a game 40 times. These games are very small by comparison to a lot of our current games. And as such, I'm not expecting people to sit through and watch me fight the same 6 enemies for an hour and a half, 2 hours at a time. That's just not feasible. I'm currently sitting at 7 HP for those of you who are using this as background noise. And I'm not liking my odds. There's a part of me that thinks I should just turn around and go back to the save point. But I think I will hold off for now. Chances are I'm going to fall, I'm going to and Well, as I said, I overextended myself. I should have went back. But I was a little preoccupied with getting to the end, getting to the next major story beat that I neglected to pay attention to my surroundings. Anywho, if you like this series, are interested in recommending your own, leave a like, drop a comment of what you'd like to see. And all else fails, we'll see you next week. Until then, take care of yourselves and have a good one.